interesting progression from the 67s to the 64s to the 61s. And what we found, or at least it was my impression, and maybe I was lobbying a little, but I wouldn't do
like
that.
James Lobby, or
No, I didn't study political science. But for me, the 61s had a little bit more stuffing than the 67s, but not the same precision, either on the nose or the palate. And so you got wines that were a little bit richer than the 67s, but ultimately perhaps a tad less complex as a result.
Well, we said big shoulders on the 61. These were bigger wines, but not as elegant.
Right, and coming after the 64s, which had the same broad shoulders, but precision and complexity and nuance and sweet, sappy fruit in the middle. And so then we started speculating whether or not the 61s were perhaps just a little further on in their plateau of maturity, and so had gotten to this point where they're starting to get a little bit more
Diffuse.
Maybe diffuse, or maybe just more uniform in their expressions aromatically and flavor-wise, and not as delineated as the 67s and 64s.
The noses were harder to pick out than the 61s.
Yeah, but I really liked them. I'd be thrilled to drink them anytime.
Yeah.
And that's the best 61 Bartolo Mascarello I've ever had. I've only had it once before. And the other one I had was so different.
Was it lighter?
It was lighter,
It was like
very
lighter,
ethereal
like
and red fruity.
It was actually like strawberry.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that was the one I had previously. This one I like better. And I think it'll be very interesting. I think that was the youngest of the 61s.
93, and I still remember. So.
Yeah, exactly. Mine might be going back that ways. But did people share that opinion or that impression anyway?
I was delighted at how rich these were. I
Yeah,
was expecting much less, and I thought after the 64s, there's no way these could really live up to it, and they really were in the pocket, you know. I mean,
They held, in terms of stuffing, they held their own.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
the color, even the Capilano was deeper in color.
I wanted to see that ones to be the best.
So I was delighted at how kind of
What, you thought
the
61s
weights
were
and
the best?
the
Yeah.
richness.
I wanted the 64s.
They were a little
I wanted them to be. The
64s
64s were so better.
What were people's favorite of the 61 flight?
For me, the Odero.
Modero?
Odero, the Mascarello was not half bad.
And also the Cabernet.
Second.
Yeah, I think our table was a Bartolo Mascarello table.
Yes.
I was Barolo for the first
and
and
the
this one, the Mascarello.
It was a good
Mascarello
Odero.
had all shades of gray.
harmonious, spherical kind of thing going on.
Yeah, with the Odero, I thought it was interesting because probably it's different vineyard sources in 61 than 67 or 64. Because in 63 they started buying better crus. So previously they were based all in Barolo, in the village of Barolo, and they had lesser crus in Barolo. 63 they bought their first parcel of Brunate, and then 64, 65, 66, in that stretch, they bought also some Roque and some other good crus, and they sold some of their vineyards in Barolo, or did not blend them into their bottling of Barolo, and used it for the Nebbiolo. And I thought there was a distinct difference in the vineyard sources in the 61 and the 67 for Odero. The Odero, because the 67 was very elegant in style, and the 61 I thought had a little bit more of that sort of noble rusticity, if you will, in a beautiful, classic way.
Kind of showing a little bit of mannerization, but in the best way. I mean, it was kind of showing some decay, but it was delicious.
Yeah, I thought it was, Exhibit A, Old Barolo. Yeah, I mean, just classic example.
Was there a change in the winemaking between 61 and 64?
No, only vineyard source.
Yeah. Just
No
the sourcing,
changes at all.
so the realization of the...
Yeah, I think they probably just had an opportunity to start buying better crus and started doing that.
Yeah.
And continued to do that.
There was a distinct qualitative sense of evolution between the two vineyards, at least to my palate.
Yeah, to mine also. They got more elegant and refined, I thought.
Almost more old style to new style in the character of the wines.
Were these guys struggling to make a living?
At this time, absolutely. And people like Giacomo Conterno would be struggling less than with the Oderos, for example. Because, the Conternos already had the reputation. They had developed export markets for a stretch. And then, of course, when the market softened, they lost a lot of their export
Where
markets.
would the export market?
They sold a lot to Brazil.
Wasn't Aldo in New York at that time, or when did Aldo?
I don't, Aldo left in early 70s, I think.
I don't think the British
Yeah,
market
early
was
70s.
buying Barolos.
No, they weren't.
Early
No,
70s.
Italy, France, and South America, they actually sold a fair amount.
Was
The
in the
Conternos had
US.
a cousin or
No,
an
I didn't know about
uncle
them.
who moved to
Big.
Brazil.
He was in
I think it
the
was Brazil.
50s.
Again, I'd have
He
to
was
consult the article.
Just
I
needed
wrote.
somebody there.
But it was somewhere in
So,
Latin
it's
America,
not
maybe it was
a
Chile,
bad
but in any event, they sold a lot of wine
I just like it.
to South America in the stretch between the wars. And then after the Second World War, that market disappeared. And so they were sort of starting again. But, they didn't have, people like Odero would not have had the same financial background, or shall we say, reserve.
Do you know when the US market developed for Barolos?
I don't, maybe Mandy would know better than I would.
Still hasn't, right?
I mean, there
Outside of this room, it hasn't.
was always a market in New York, and I think, even today, that's by far the biggest market. But nothing like what we see today. I mean, Giacomo Quintero's wines. Almaden was, in the late 70s, was representing Giacomo.
Right, late 70s through the mid 80s or late 80s.
Yeah. Before that, do we know who?
I have no idea.
represented them?
No clue. If anybody.
Borgogna was definitely here.
Right, but again, Borgonia was a much more affluent family to start with.
Fontana
They
Freddo.
weren't growers. They
Fontana
were,
Freddo was a really big brand.
Borgogna was an affluent family?
yes, it was one of the affluent families. In Barolo, generally, you had 2 or 3 very wealthy families that used to buy all the wine and make all the wine for a long stretch. And then you had the evolution of the growers starting to branch out on their own and set up their own wineries. And so people like Francesco Rinaldi or Odero were growers that branched into making their own wines. And then you had people that were merchants previously, like Giacomo Quinterno said, well, let's start making our own wine too. I mean, the Quinterno started as restaurateurs, and so they knew what to buy. And finally they said, well, we should make our own wine too. So it went from the cantina to the winery.
Great, thanks.
So John, your wine of the evening, which one are you going to walk away with?
64 Barolo. For me, that was the most perfect of an evening of a lot of great Barolo. I mean, we were talking about the fact that given this range of old Barolo, to have 5 different producers, 3 old vintages, and to have no clunkers, I mean,
Right.
just extraordinary lineup.
Yeah.
Just fabulous. Not one wine I wouldn't savor with a dinner on its own and just be ecstatic, jumping up and down, driving my wife crazy, saying, no, give me that. You don't like it enough, give me that glass.
I think in this pinker tightening color of that 67 Capilano,
Oh,
it
yes.
quitted itself. It was just like, uh-oh. Did you feel an uh-oh?
Yeah, a little bit.
I felt an uh-oh.
No, I didn't.
And it was,
I didn't at all.
once I tasted it, it was great. And it was
Yeah, that had just such a profound finish. But for the Capellanos, the 64 for me was the one that stole my heart. I mean, for me that was just as good a Capellano Barolo as I've ever
But
had.
also 61 was...
Again, for me, lacked just a little precision. Aromatically, I loved it. It was just a little lacking focus on the palate compared to the 64. Which maybe is what makes 64 such a great vintage, is the combination of broad shoulders, intensity, power, and precision and elegance. Sort of if you took a 67 and a 61, put them together, you'd get a 64.
So what about this Chinato?
Oh, I haven't tasted it yet.